Hi, my name is Emeka Morrow and welcome to Growth is Personal. Each week, I share insights and strategies that will equip you to accelerate your personal and professional growth and bring you conversations that will empower you to thrive in life, career, and business.
All right, welcome once again to Grow This Personal podcast. Today, I have with me in the studio one and only Richard Newman. Richard, I'm so grateful that you take the time to be with me today on the podcast. Before I jump into our conversation for today, I'd like you to do a little bit of introduction. I have your profile here, but I choose to allow my guests to introduce themselves because they are the better teller. They tell their story better. As much as I have the profile, my guest, there's something about you telling your story and giving us an insight into your journey of who you are and what our audience need to know about you. Go ahead, Richard.
Sure. So I've been on a journey my whole life based around wanting to help myself and then help my clients to communicate. So I started off my journey back when I was at school, really, where I realized that I was struggling with communication. I didn't really know why at the time. And so started reading books around the topic. This led me to a fascination with communication. I went to India. I'm sure we get into this story more, but I'll just briefly, I went to India. I lived in the foothills of the Himalayas teaching English to monks, which involved using body language and tone of voice because they couldn't speak any English. And then I studied acting after that, and then set up my company, which is really just a hobby at the time, my company Body Talk, where I was teaching people communication, and originally just sort of teaching body language and tone of voice and that sort of piece, and then expanding to everything else that we now teach around storytelling and presenting and all these other pieces. And so now I've been running that company for 23 years, which really just started as like a little hobby. And now there's more than 20 of us on the team, and we're teaching thousands of people every year all over the world. Which has been a really magical journey for me. But what I do and what I love is just helping people, helping them come to life, helping them find their own voice so that they can reach their true potential.
Interesting. I want to talk about the monk because it's when I read that in your profile, I was like, okay, because the first time I heard about someone going to the to the monks, was this man's name, Jay Shetty or so? I think he had a story where he went to be a monk for some time. So when I heard you going to the monk, I was like, okay, what's this about the monk? So tell us about what drove you, because now you mentioned, number one, not just that you went to the monk, you went to teach them. So what was the driver behind going to that part of the world?
Sure. So essentially what happened when I was 17 years old, I realized that most of the people at my school were going to go to university. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that was not the path for me. And somebody who is an ex-student from our school, an older guy, he came back in and did a talk to all of us. And he said how he'd had this amazing experience. He didn't go straight to university. He took a gap year, and he had been teaching at an orphanage in Kathmandu, I believe it was, where he talked about this amazing journey of how he sort of got to the orphanage, where he was riding on the roof of a bus through the mountains in Nepal and eventually got there. And I thought, this is extraordinary. That's the kind of experience I want to have. I want to go and do something that is very different from my very comfortable life. And I really wanted to give something back to people. And so I started looking at the opportunities, and I went to find this gap year activity project sort of company, and they said, well, here's what we'd like to offer you. We're going to give you a position where you go and teach acting to sort of wealthy kids at a rich private school in India. And I said to them, look, you've completely missed what I'm here for. What I want to do is go and help people who really need help. Give me something else. And so they very kindly, they found something else. They said, well, there is this monastery that we've heard of where nobody's actually been a teacher there before. And it's really in the middle of nowhere. But if you want to go and do that position, you can do that. And I said, that's the one for me. Sign me up. And so, I went there aged 18, I had never been overseas without my parents at this point.
Hmm.
I got to India. It took me 2 days to travel from Delhi across to the foothills of the Himalayas where this little monastery was. And I eventually found the monastery and was greeted by these monks who just didn't speak a word of English. They spoke Nepali, Tibetan, and Hindi really well, but no English. And so I had to very quickly figure out, how can I communicate non-verbally? Because they didn't know English, they didn't know any French or German, which I knew as well. And so we had to communicate non-verbally, and that was a huge revelation for me. And I spent 6 months living with them, and this is back in the 1990s. There was no internet back then. There's no mobile phones. The best way to communicate actually was by fax. But it would cost so much money to spend 1 page of a fax going home that I would tend to write letters, and the letters would take 6 weeks to go from the monastery back home, and 6 weeks again to get a reply. So the fastest communication I could get with home took about 3 months. We barely had electricity. They had no hot running water until I arrived there. And yet it was this extraordinary experience living with these incredible monks who had this serene state of mind, and gradually teaching them how to speak English.
So what did that do to you, as a person? Because there's something about, sometimes I'm a person who believes in nothing just happens by coincidence, right? And our journey, every step of our journey, somehow we tend to bloom in places where is not glamorous. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes we go to some places, like when I was, growing up in my school, I wanted to go to one of the rich schools, the popular schools, but I ended up not going there. I had to go to a school in a remote village where I couldn't even speak the language. I had to learn the language. But one thing I discovered is that oftentimes the people who become great, who do stuff great, they have a story around going to places where no one knows, where it's like, it's crude, right? So tell me, how did that transform you, that experience? How did that transform you as a person? And what value did you derive from that?
Yeah, great question. I think you're so right to say that we grow through challenge. I mean, at the moment I do weightlifting, and I'm constantly hearing, look, the first few reps that you do don't actually really do anything. It's like rep number 25 where it's seriously uncomfortable, and that's where all the growth happens. And so I think the same is true in personal experience. So for me, with this experience, I would encourage, first of all parents, if you have a child who wants to go and do something that seems adventurous, of course, you've got to figure out what the risks are, but let them go and do it, because this was transformative for my life. I was sort of heading down a direction where I thought I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I was passionate about acting and psychology and teaching, but I didn't really know what that meant or what I would do. And if I hadn't done this, I would have gone down a very safe, comfortable route of, I had like a few university offers for degrees that I wasn't that interested in, and I could have spent all my parents' money and mine as well on going and doing that. But I didn't. I went and did this experience where, for me, I mean, just the experience that I went through, from getting on the aeroplane in London to getting to Delhi and then figuring out how to get there across the country to this remote little town and find this tiny monastery that nobody had even heard of. That was a massive growth experience for me, just those first few days. And to give you some idea about this, my friends had placed a bet on me of how long it would take before I came home. And I was due to be away for 8 months. The longest bet that anyone had placed on me was 10 days. And so I thought, I have to make it 11 days, because otherwise I lose this bet. I have to prove them all wrong. And so, when I finally got to this monastery, I've been through all kinds of experiences of sort of traveling on trains for sort of more than a day, where nobody seemed to speak any English. I didn't know what was going on, where I was even. And finally finding this monastery. Thankfully, the monastery itself was a place of total calm, safety, and serenity. But suddenly I was in a situation of thinking, okay, like I have to figure out a schedule of like, what am I going to teach? And how does their day work, and what do we eat around here, and how do I navigate my way around like the sort of the town that's surrounding them? And all of that stuff really gave me a sense of very strong independence, a great sense of inner confidence that I was able to overcome all sorts of challenges and be entirely self-reliant. And that stood me in good stead for the rest of my life. And it's like literally a moment in time where it was a pivotal turning point for me, where an interesting point too is that people always pick up on it. Every time I go and meet a potential new client, or I speak to a new potential member of staff, they're like, wow, what was that like living with monks? And it becomes a story that 27 years later, I still feel fascinated telling people, and they feel fascinated too. So, I think that you're right to say, for people to, like the Growth is Personal podcast, for people to have growth, putting yourself in a situation of adversity is a great thing to do, rather than wake up in the same comfort zone every day with, a warm sofa and a full refrigerator. Go and do something else that is going to challenge you, because then you really figure out who you are, what your limitations are, what you're good at doing, what you need to expand your knowledge and skills on, and then you'll have that for a lifetime.
Yeah, and you have a story. Like, this is the story that you always, would tell. And I think what I was listening to, was it a podcast recently, and one of the, I think it was someone I followed on LinkedIn. I said one of the stories he keeps hearing, CEOs, people who are retired in retirement homes, who are big people in society, but now are retired. One of the greatest regrets they always share is not the fact that they didn't make enough money or something. It's always the fact that they never had great experiences. And that's because they did not take chances. They did not put themselves out there. So I believe that every time we create experiences like this, it's part of our story. So I really appreciate, you sharing this with us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to build on, where the way I see it is that we all have this little comfort zone where we know that inside that zone, we know what's what, we know what we're doing. We have skills to sort of provide for ourselves, keep ourselves alive, keep ourselves warm and fed. And it is very tempting. And there are survival instincts that we have that says, stay in your comfort zone. Don't come out the comfort zone. That's the place of safety. If you go outside this little comfort zone, you could die. And so there's a voice in your head that says, stay where you are, stay where you are. But there's another voice, like you mentioned, that says, I want to experience something. I want something new. I want adventure. I want to know what's over there. And so when this little voice says, stay where you are, it's worthwhile listening to this voice that says, no, step outside that comfort zone. So there's sort of two choices here. If you stay inside your comfort zone, you only do things that feel safe and are the things that you did yesterday. That comfort zone doesn't stay the same. It actually gradually gets smaller, where you just do the things that felt most comfortable yesterday. Whereas each day I aim to challenge myself to do one thing each day that puts me outside that comfort zone. And then by the end of a year, by the end of 10 years, what you feel comfortable doing is completely extraordinary. So to lead that up to, something that I've done recently, we've all been through this pandemic where, as a leader, I felt phenomenally challenged at the beginning of 2020, seeing that I'm running a live events business. All of our bookings, literally everything, every form of income we had was cancelled by the end of February. And we had people on the payroll, a big, fancy, expensive London office. And I had to really figure out, well, how am I going to make this happen? And if I hadn't been the kind of person that was constantly expanding my comfort zone, ready to step outside and take on new challenges, then I might have been like, I saw some people who said, well, let's just sort of hibernate and hope that this is over in a few months. And they didn't do very much. Where I saw other people that I was aiming to emulate as well, who said, this is an opportunity to step up to the plate and really take on this challenge and see what I can do to lead people, to inspire people, to elevate my work. And, as a result of that, I was able to come through that situation, help my company through it, help my clients through it. And we thrived that year rather than suffering. And so, this idea of stepping outside the comfort zone is, it's a skill for life. It's something that you will always come back to and you can rely on in times of challenge.
I mean, when you were talking, something came to my mind, and I want you to, if you can expand on this, is around, the Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs, where it was like a pyramid. And oftentimes, the safety, the basic needs, and then harmony and stuff like that. But we see that at the top is where we have, there are few people. So it's self-actualization and people who are driven by a greater sense of purpose and want to help others and stuff. But I've realized that when we tend to focus on, others, or on our purpose, on helping people become more impact and stuff, we tend to, all these things tend to come to us, right? Like the basic needs, I want you to talk about this. How do you shift that focus or that conversation so that people understand that yes, it's important to focus on basic needs, but that's not all there is to life. Because when you want to go out of your comfort zone, you have to understand that there's something more than what you're currently going through. There has to be a bigger why. And once you change those bigger why, other things will begin to come to you. Is there something that connects that to achieving purpose? Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think purpose is so important, and there's a couple of pieces to what you've said there about the hierarchy of needs that I think are important to stress. So first of all, if you're in a situation where you are really challenged with figuring out how to pay your bills, how to make sure that you're fed, how to make sure your family is fed, then the idea of sort of doing personal development feels like an absolute luxury. Like if I only had time enough to do personal development. And so you do need to look after those basic needs to make sure that you are going to survive until the next day and the next day. So that's important. But once you've done that, it's important not to stay comfortable within that, thinking, okay, I've now figured out how to do this. In order for you to feel fulfilled in your life, there has to be something more than that. Otherwise, you just think, okay, I've got my nose to the grindstone. I'm putting my heart and soul into every single day. And what do I have at the end of it? I still have no money in the bank. I still feel tired out and exhausted. And I feel like my life is pointless other than just sort of working to pay the bills. And so I think this idea of a higher purpose behind it is absolutely critical. And this is something that I relied on as well, to go back to 2020, where there was a huge challenge for me and for my family and for my clients and for my team, where I had to think about what is the vision for a better future that I am determined to create that will get me out of bed in the morning on days when I actually don't feel like getting out of bed. And so there's two parts of this for me, which is the values and the vision. So a lot of people, they may have goals in their life where they think, I want to be a lawyer or whatever it might be. And when they question it, they suddenly might realize, well, I think the reason that I wanted to be, married and a lawyer is because my parents wanted that for me. And I've seen people get there and they go, oh, I'm actually not happy here. Now, why is that? I thought this is what I always wanted. And they start to question, was it advertising? Was it a movie they saw once? Was it their family peer pressure that made them think that's what they wanted? So before you set up what your vision is, you have to think about what your values are. And values mean, what are the principles that are guiding your life? What is a way that you can act every day that would make you feel immensely proud, no matter what else is happening? And so this was a core piece for me, going back a couple of years where it was very stressful, where I thought, what kind of person do I want to be under the situation that we're all going through? And so to give people an example, when it comes to values, my number one value is essentially to be a good father. I have two young kids, two young boys. And to be a good father, like that's something, how do you measure that? There's no correct way to be a good parent. So for me, it means certain things like connecting with them, being present with them, helping them build a relationship with each other, giving them life skills, survival skills, helping them laugh and play. It's all these sorts of things. And so I have a code term for that helps me remember it. My code term is polar bears. And the reason being that they have a game that they created with me called Polar Bears, where I get down on the floor, one of them gets underneath me, one of them gets on top of me, and I carry them around, move them around like we're acting like we're polar bears, and I'm teaching them life skills and survival skills and being present with them and helping them play with each other. So it's all the things I think about in being a good father. And so to take that back to that sense of purpose, if I get up on a day where I think, oh, I don't want to do this today, I don't want to do this anymore, then one of my values being polar bears, I can just come back to that and think, what example am I determined to set for my children such that they grow up to have the most fulfilling and happy lives? Am I just going to pay the bills, or am I going to show them what an adult can do under times of pressure, under times of stress? What am I going to embody? Because they're going to face challenges in their future, and they will remember and potentially embody without even realizing it subconsciously what I did, what I showed for them, how I role modeled. And so I was determined every day during times of challenge to think, okay, my children are watching, whether I even know that they are or not. And they pick up things, whether you think they've seen it or heard it or not. So I would always think, okay, what kind of person do I want to be, such that when I go to bed tonight, it doesn't matter what's happened. It doesn't matter who's won or lost an election. It doesn't matter who started or finished a war. All those things, if I can just be a great role model to them, then that is a sense of purpose. And so I have a few things like that for me set up the values that paint a vision of a future that I want to create. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. And every conversation is leading up to something else that I'm going to ask you. And you're talking about vision, vision board. It's almost like you have a vision board, if I may say. So how does that? Because a lot of times we hear about vision board, and sometimes people downplay its importance. So I wanted to talk about vision board. How has that helped you frame? What is the importance of setting up a vision board for yourself or for your business? How does that translate into the result that you end up creating for yourself?
Yeah. So the way I like to talk about this is two sides: vision boards and mission boards. So, for example, some people who don't have a vision board might think that they're pointless. If you haven't created one for yourself, the world has created one for you. So I'll give an example on this. My wife is a doctor, and when there was the recession, 2008 recession, she had patients coming into her surgery to speak to her, where they would say to her, "Oh, I'm so stressed out. I'm so depressed." And she'd say, "Why?" And they said, "Well, because of this recession." And she would say to them, "Well, hang on a second. What have you lost your job?" And they'd say, "No." Is your company at risk? No. Has this impacted your family financially yet? No. Do you think that it will? I don't know. And then she say to them, "Well, can you tell me why you're stressed and depressed?" And they say, "Well, the thing is, in the news every day, they're just talking about this. And it just seems like the whole world is going to fall apart. And what is this future going to be?" And so that vision board is being created by whatever media you are consuming that is telling you what your future is going to be. And, if you're not careful, if you're watching YouTube and all these ads come up, or watching any channel really, and ads come up, they're trying to tell you what you should desire and what your future should be. And you're just taking in all those messages, and the ones you see the most, your brain says, okay, that must be what my identity is. As an example of this, they did studies on this where they found that if somebody is shown the logo of Coca-Cola, their frontal lobe fires, and the frontal lobe is where we store things like our identity. And so we've all seen the Coca-Cola logo so much, we believe it's actually part of who we are as a human being living a human experience. So if you're not creating a vision board, the world is creating one for you. So instead, I always encourage people to create their own vision board, and you can do it in any way that works for you. You can write down what your goals would be. I actually teach this method to my clients of not just writing out a list, but writing a story of a future date. So they could say, it is 2030 and this is my life, and you describe it utterly vividly, so you can imagine all those things and you know what that looks like. And your brain is then going to subconsciously be driven towards it, because it knows, okay, that day is coming and I know what that looks like, and I have to make choices that move me towards it. To do an actual vision board, which I like doing, you put pictures up, of course, of things where you think this is going to be part of my life. And I like to look at them every morning. I do a stretch every morning to just get my joints going, and having a sip of hot lemon water just to get my body going. And I'll look at this vision board and I imagine this is my life. This is where I am. These are the things I'm doing. These are the people that I'm helping. So it's just training my mind every single morning. This is my life. This is who I'm going to be. This is my identity. But there's a second part to this, which is the mission board, which a lot of people don't do. And I encourage people to do this. The mission board for me, so the vision board is looking forwards. The mission board is looking backwards. And I put on things on my mission board that are things that have already happened because I once put them on a vision board. So once you've completed something on a vision board, you put it on your mission board. And the reason that can be useful is in times of stress where you think, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. I heard a phrase a couple of years back, which was, I didn't come this far to only come this far. And so that's what my mission board is for. I can look back at it and go, wow, look, I have a painting there of the first international event that I led my team through, where there was, I think, 8 of us on my team teaching people in Prague. And I bought this painting on the bridge in Prague because I thought I want to remember this event. And I have it up there on my mission board, so I can always think back to, oh yeah, I remember when doing that was a massive challenge and a huge adventure for me. Wow, look at how far I've come and how much I've managed to achieve and how many people I've managed to help. So the mission board gets me to a state of, I can do extraordinary things. And then I look at my vision board and go, that's where I'm heading next. So I'd encourage everybody to do that.
That's a new one, mission board. And I think it helps you create a sense of gratitude, right? Because you know what you have, what you have accomplished, and you know that, it's always going to get better. Now let's shift the conversation a little bit to your story. Part of your story was that you were introverted, you were shy, and you were high functioning autistic. So tell me how, because I've worked in an environment, with people who have, who live in these experiences. And how has, now you are doing something that is really incredible that some people dream to even do. So what changed, or how did you transform to this person who now leads others in the area of communication and teach it? So what changed, and how did you develop yourself to get to this point?
Yeah, so this is something I often share with people when I'm aiming to inspire them around communication, because some people say, I'm just not a good communicator and I never will be. And I say to them, look, it is absolutely possible for you. There's no question in my mind. When I was a child, I was incredibly shy. You know the kind of kids where when you go over to someone's house, the child is hiding behind the parents' legs and doesn't want to come out. That was me, completely me. And I would hide in the corner of a classroom as well, and not want to be called on to do, like reading in school. If ever in like English class or history class, someone was supposed to read from a book, I was just really praying that nobody would pick on me to do that. Incredibly shy. Also, and I am today, still highly introverted. I've done this many times. So there are profiling systems where you can see, where on the spectrum between introvert and extrovert are you. And I have the highest score that you can get for being an introvert. So much so that I was at a program once where you had to fill it out online before you showed up to the event. And this guy at the front who was leading it, he held up a profile and he said, so this person's profile, look at this. They're so introvert. This person wouldn't even show up for this day. And I said, that's mine. You're holding up my form. And he said, no, I'm not. I can't possibly be. I said, you are. That's a copy of my form. And so, for me, like, just to help people with the definition, in case they're not clear, introvert means you get energy by being alone. So that's how you recharge your battery. And extrovert means that you gain energy from being around other people. And, I love people. I love being around them and so on. But I do re-energize by being by myself. So if the way I manage that is if I go out into the world where I'm teaching clients, I'm going through airports, I'm doing all sorts of stuff. For me, I then need to come home, put on a hoodie, go into a dark room and just be by myself. To maybe watch some Netflix or something, just have some space so I can recharge and then go out into the world. And I found that actually being a public speaker as an introvert is a really nice space to be, because extroverts are great at doing back and forth conversation, back and forth banter and so on. Whereas as an introvert, I've noticed when I've coached people, it's actually slightly easier to coach an introvert to do a speech, because they are better at just giving their energy out without needing to do all the back and forth pieces that happen. So that's a really enjoyable space for me to be in. The last piece for me is something that I wasn't aware of until I started to get an inkling of an idea a couple of years back. And I was only diagnosed as autistic just, where are we now? About 12 months ago. And suddenly it was like a moment of sort of circling back through my life and thinking, oh, that's why all this stuff has been happening. I just didn't understand until that moment what exactly it was. And, there's a huge range of people on the autistic spectrum. There are people with different needs, different challenges, different situations than I'm in. But for me, what I always knew is that I was struggling to communicate with most people, not everybody, but most people. And as I found out from being autistic, that autistic people can actually communicate brilliantly well with each other. And neurotypical people, which is most people, they communicate brilliantly well with each other. The challenge comes up when a neurotypical person tries to communicate with an autistic person, and suddenly their way of communicating is so different that it becomes a challenge. And so I always knew that I had a challenge with communication with most people. I just didn't know what it was. And so I decided that I wanted to be better at communicating with everybody. And so I just started studying. And I read early on, I read more than 200 books in communication. I just kept on going through them because I thought, even if I only gained one extra tip from this book, it could be of value to me. And I knew that this was important because when I was back at school, there was a friend of mine who had been turned down from going to his favorite chosen university, partly because they said his communication skills were not good enough. And this was a really hardworking, very intelligent, highly dedicated, great person. And so I thought, okay, this is clearly important to success. And so I thought, I have to get good at communication. And so I studied it. I really leaned into the challenge on that. And as a result, I found ways of being able to communicate effectively with more people, to the point where, you know, there are people, whether they're neurotypical, autistic, or anything else, that they would be coming to me saying, how do you do that? Because you really understand communication. So I was then able to teach everybody, look, I've come from a place where I wasn't good at communicating. I've figured out all these strategies, and I know exactly what's missing if you're struggling, so I can share those pieces with others. So I would say to anybody, if you have a challenge, if there's something you're not great at, and then you study it and figure out how to be great at it, you can then teach everybody else what you've learned. Because if you were born with some kind of natural talent to do something, you don't actually know how you're doing it. But if you struggle to get there, you can teach everybody else how to get there.
I want to touch on the point of teaching because I've seen that oftentimes to be a better way of learning, and or a better way of building that sort of reputation. So let's talk about learning, teaching by learning. Is that something that we all have to adopt as a strategy to be able to, number one, develop expertise as something? Because sometimes people just stay on the part of learning. They study, and there's no distinction between them and the person who is not even studying at all, because we can't really see. So is there a point where teaching plays a key role in, number one, gaining expertise, and number two, also building that reputation or credibility?
Yeah, I think both sides to this are really important to me, and I'm really glad that you've asked me this because I'm so passionate about this. I think that teaching and, if you like, training people, as well as having experiential learning, are the two pieces that have to go together. So if you think about it this way, if somebody's never driven a car before, and you put them in a car and you say, figure it out, they're probably going to be a horrible driver or crash the car pretty quickly. So it's not a great way to start. But if you, before that, if you do the teaching or the training part of it, and you say, this is what the pedals do, this is what the steering wheel does, these are all the things that you're going to need to know, and give them as much information as you can to the point where they go, okay, I think I get it. And then you safely give them that experiential learning. Then the experiential learning makes them go, oh, that's why you taught me this. Oh, that's what that means. Oh, that's how I can apply this piece. And so I think those two pieces have to go hand in hand. So if I think about that in terms of the classroom experience that we give our clients, there's one piece that always I find a joy to teach. We talk about objection handling. Like, how do you handle it if somebody is really pushing back on your ideas that you might be working with? And what I love about it is that when we're teaching it, we're using storytelling to do it. So it's giving aha moments along the way. But essentially, every person in every classroom we've ever been to anywhere in the world, they look at what we're teaching, they go, oh yeah, yeah, that's probably what I do anyway. That all seems straightforward. I can do that, no problem. So you do the teaching bit, and they think that they know how to do it. You then give them the experiential learning. And I think out of 120,000 people that we've worked with on our teams, I've seen maybe 2, maybe 3 people who actually could then straight away do what we were teaching them. And everybody else almost sort of fell over in the process and thought, I can't believe it. When I heard it, I thought I knew how to do it. Then when I tried to actually do it, it wasn't working at all. So I think having both pieces is critical. And much like, to go back to the example I was sharing with, living with monks, it's all very well to teach people how to be self-reliant and teach them how to be independent, but to actually have the visceral experience is something that you cannot replace. So you've got to have both of those pieces. And the experiential learning as well is just a sense of, this is why learning matters. I think too many kids go through school thinking, I don't even know why I'm being taught geography. I don't know why I'm being taught long division. There are calculators out there, until they're put in a situation where they go, I need this skill because this is going to help me pay my bills, or this is going to help me save up for something that I really care about. Then they understand why the information matters.
Okay. So next question, can everyone become a better communicator? Or are some people just born to be better at it? Like, can we actually can people become a better communicator? Because I think this is a very critical skill, especially in this day and age. We have, AI is coming, or AI is already here, right? AI is doing a fantastic job and all, to the point where if we don't embrace this skill of communication, it's gonna really impact the workplace. So can people become better communicator? If yes, what are the steps? If you are to highlight 3-4 steps to become a better communicator, at work or whatever you do, what would that be?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 key points to this. The first one is like this AI world that is coming, where there are chatbots that have been people have been using recently, where I understand you just put in a few ideas and it will write an essay for you that seems perfect and very human in so many ways. And there's more AI learning that's coming up, and people using more of virtual reality. And I think that all of that can be great and very valuable in many ways. But the other side to that is that I've noticed the more that people are engaging with screens, as in, video games or virtual conversations and so on, the less time they are spending with other human beings. And I don't believe that at any point there will be an experience created by a robot or a machine that will replace the visceral experience of a human connecting with another human being. I think that is so much part of what we yearn for, that it's beyond what the words are. It's beyond anything. It's not just, what a face looks like or anything. There is just an energetic connection that one human can have with another human that cannot be replaced elsewhere. And getting good at understanding how to connect with somebody else is going to be critical, and it's going to be more important. So if someone was to invest in their personal growth, that for me is the skill that is going to be absolutely vital in the future to make you stand out above other people, because the vast majority of the population are spending less time being good at human-to-human communication. If you look at parents who talk about having, the kids having sleepovers, at sleepovers, when I was younger, you'd sit around and chat and make up games together and just connect. Whereas kids doing sleepovers these days, they all have their screens out, and they might just be looking at their phone and texting each other or messaging each other on social media, and they're sitting next to each other. So the idea of connecting with another human being is a vital skill. The other part to this is, you mentioned there, can everybody be a great communicator? And the way I would put this is that you can't teach every person to be at the greatest communicator, the most charismatic person on the planet. So some people have slightly more skills. I think about it this like learning tennis. Can everyone learn how to play the game of tennis? Sure. Yes, they can. Is everybody going to win Wimbledon? No, they're not. It's just simply not going to work out that way. But the key part behind this, the statistics show us this, and I interviewed a lady on my podcast going back a few years, where she said the way that communication works from an early age is that roughly 90% of people will develop communication in a way where they feel comfortable and good at doing it. They don't have to think about it that much. There's about 2.5% of people who will have a permanent challenge of some sort, such as permanent hearing loss, and the other 7.5% will have to work harder for some reason. And this was actually part of where I realized that I was in that 7.5%, and I would have to work harder. But can everybody communicate well? Absolutely. I mean, again, having trained 120,000 people from all over the world, across Europe, the Middle East. We've been to Asia. We've been to like South Korea. We've been across to Australia, all across North America, South America with my team as well. We've never come across someone where we thought, oh, this person shouldn't be on this course. They can't communicate. For every single person, there are simple techniques that everybody can learn to apply that helps them be a better communicator. And the most joyful thing about it is that when you learn to be a better communicator, it's actually not about learning things that you never knew. It's actually about reconnecting you with instincts that you may have forgotten. So if you look at a child, when a child is communicating, what do? So, if a kid walks into a room and they've got a story they want to tell you, their voice is going all over the place and they're gesticulating and they're moving around and doing all these things when they're excited to tell you about something. And as you get older, you go through school and people say, why are you doing that? Why are you speaking like that? That sounds rubbish. And so your voice stops having so much variation. And they say, oh, stop moving your arms about. You look like an idiot. And people stop gesturing. And you get to the point where somebody is 25 and they've been through enough of those negative comments that they think, okay, the safest thing to do is not to move and keep my voice on a level tone here, because that way I can't get picked on. And they don't realize that they're doing it. It's just armor and habits they've picked up. And so what we tend to do is unpick those negative limiting habits. Getting rid of the armor is what we often talk about, so that people can come back to their full self, their full potential. And then, of course, we add in some strategies there to just to let them know what's going to make them feel their best, have their greatest presence, expand their voice, so that they can be a great communicator. So, in a simple answer, yes, everybody is born to speak and can be a great communicator.
Okay, I want to pick up on the presence, because a key part of communication, I believe, is presence, right? Because sometimes you can even be communicating without saying anything, right? So how can we develop, will I call it, some people call it executive presence, but I want to use stay within the confines of communication. How can you develop that presence such that you can communicate without even saying a word?
Yeah, great. I love that you say communicate without saying a word, because the funny thing is we are always communicating, not just when we open our mouth, not just when we send an email. I mean, if you think about it this way, if somebody sends you an email marked urgent and you open it and you don't reply, you're communicating with them. If someone asks you a question and you don't reply, you are communicating with them. And so we are always communicating. So in terms of having presence, this is something that you can work on from many different perspectives. The key part, of course, is to be in the now, but also connected with the other people in the room. And so one of the pieces we talk to people about is, before you go in a room, if you are intending to make a positive impact, before you go in that room, you need to get very clear on your intention for this meeting. People who have strong presence have a strong intention that is driving them. And so you get highly intentional of, by the end of this meeting, by the end of this interaction, what are you aiming to achieve there? What is your intention? And I talk about the intention of lift, which is what I talk about in my upcoming book. If you go in with the intention of lift, that means that you intend that by the end of that interaction, that everyone who's in that room is going to move from a negative or a neutral state to a positive or a more positive state. That is your intention. And you get very clear about the intentionality behind that. Now, once you go into the room or you go into the experience, you need to get out of your head and into focusing on other people. So a lot of people talk about getting self-conscious. If you're consciously focusing on others, you cannot be self-conscious, because you are conscious of them rather than yourself. And so the way I talk about this is, it's a bit like being a surfer on the ocean. So you can learn how to stand on a board and sort of prepare in your mind how you want to surf on the ocean while you're on the beach. You sort of learn popping up and learn how you need to stand, posture, and so on. But when you actually get onto the ocean, you need to feel the waves. You need to feel, the rhythm of the ocean. And so if it's a still day, it's going to be a different experience for you than if the waves are highly choppy. And so to be a good surfer, you have to be fully present. And I feel that way whenever I'm doing a speech to a large group. It'd be very easy for me, now that I've taught my subjects for 23 years, it'd be very easy for me to just pop up there and kind of mechanically go through it. And so instead, I think of myself as a surfer on the ocean. And so everyone I'm speaking to, if it's 100 or 1,000 people, I think, okay, what is the energy I'm getting from the ocean, from the front row, the back row, in the middle? What energy do I have here? And I need to ride that energy in order to stay present with this group. And the same is true, even if you're only speaking to one person, there needs to be a connection with the energy of the other person, totally present in the now of how they are and how they're feeling and how they are responding. So that's one aspect of presence. Other pieces that are key for presence is, first of all, breathing can be very powerful. There's a great technique that Andrew Huberman has been talking about a lot recently on Huberman Lab and all this social media, which is the physiological sigh, which has been popularized in more recent years. And so if somebody wants to get present, they have to really work on their breathing. Your breathing changes how you feel dramatically. So I was taught this at acting school, where if you want to immediately cry on cue or laugh on cue, you do it by controlling your breath, because your breath controls your emotions. So if you feel, disappointed, you sigh. Or if you feel upset, you start doing the strange sort of breathing. So your breath is linked to your emotion. If you want to get present, then you need to get rid of any stress that's happening that's related to where you've been before. And so the physiological sigh is where you breathe in once through the nose. You then breathe in a little bit more through the nose, and then you relax through the mouth. And if you just do that 3 times, then you get a massive outlet of the carbon dioxide. Your body resets itself and you feel ready to move on with the next part of the day. You sort of release the emotion of whatever was happening before, so you're suddenly more present. And there's more things that you can do with your voice, with your physicality, to gain that sense of presence and gravitas in a room. But that sort of gets people started for now.
Awesome. So tell me, what was it like, your first speaking engagement? How did you prepare for that? Because some of my audience are people who also want to get into speaking. What was it like to prepare for that first engagement? What did you have to do because there's difference between speaking with a group of 10 people, but now speaking to a group of 1,000 people. What was it like for you? What was the mental shift that had to happen to be present?
Yeah, I was thinking about this before the show, because I was wondering, when was my first big speaking engagement? And I actually can't remember when it was. And I think the reason behind this, and this is advice I would give to people with public speaking, and advice I would give them if they're thinking about launching their own business, is start small and move up incrementally to the point where when you get to the big audience, you don't even notice. Or when you get to a point where your company is bigger, you don't even notice. So to take that from the analogy of running a company. So, currently I run a multi-million-pound company with 20 people on my team, and we're teaching in countries all around the globe. If you told me that I was about to do that 23 years ago, I would have been having a panic attack. I would have thought, I don't know how to do that. That's crazy. There's so much to think about. But because I've gradually built up towards that piece, it feels like, oh, that's exactly where I should be. I didn't notice going from sort of having 19 people on my team to 20. But if you gave me 20 on day one, I would have been very stressed. The same goes with public speaking. So my first sort of teaching event, if you like, in my company, Body Talk, the first group that I taught was 4 people. It was 4 people in the back of a hairdressing salon, where my hairdresser had been talking to me about who I was, what I did. He'd heard about me living with monks. He'd heard about me studying acting. He said, I'll give you a free haircut if you come and teach my team how to communicate. And I said, I don't know how to do that. And he said, figure it out and come back and then do it. I'll give you a free haircut. So I went back and did it for 4 people. And I remember there was sort of like a couple of weeks build up to this, where I was really stressed. I had to do a 2-hour session. It's only 4 people. And I just had no idea what to do. And I was just racking my brains trying to figure out, what could I do? What could I teach? I went and I did it, and they loved it. They had a great time. And some of the activities I did worked really well, and some of them worked less well. And then they liked it enough that I did a couple more. And then they said, hey, could you train the rest of our team? Like, we could do like 12 people next time. So we did 12. Then we ended up doing like 20 people after that. And then I got bookings from other companies who'd heard about what I was doing there, where it suddenly went from 20 to 30 people. Then I think like the first sort of speech that I did that was shorter was to about 50 people on a networking event. And all I had to do at that point was take the best of the bits that I'd practiced when I was teaching 4 people and go, okay, that would make a good 30 minutes because I've done this for hours in the past. And then, it went from 50 to 100, 100 to 200, and gradually up to the biggest audience I've done so far is 1,000 people in person and 3,000 people in a virtual session that I was leading. And because it was incremental getting there, it actually didn't matter when I did that. So to give an analogy around lifting weights on this, is that, I'm aiming to lift heavier weights at the moment. If somebody gave me 500 kilos to lift, I couldn't do it. I'd just be it'd be ridiculous to do that. But if you start on the smaller weights and each week you aim to get slightly bigger and slightly bigger, then you don't notice when you go from like the 50 kg weights to the 60 kg weights, because it's just part of that journey. So that's what I would suggest to everybody. And just rest assured, I get a lot of bookings these days. My team gets about 2,000 bookings a year to go and teach people. But when I was first doing it, I felt nervous. I felt really nervous on the inside. I was meditating to get through the experience. Like beforehand, I would go through like hypnosis tapes, meditation tapes, just to try and get myself to the point where I could even go there. But then I enjoyed it. And, my mind then said, oh, I did that and I survived. I guess I can do another one. And then I did another bigger one, and that I survived that. So I'd always say, whatever you're doing, start small and then gradually get bigger and bigger until you can go ahead and succeed at the biggest pieces you want to be doing.
I think that's powerful. That's a powerful principle. I think if everyone can just embrace the fact that just start small, and as you keep building, your confidence increases, and you begin to even build materials that will help you. Oh man, this is powerful. So let's talk about shyness, and I think that's one of the barriers holding people back. Either shyness or fear or something that keeps people from showing up, from speaking up, maybe even in a meeting. Because I've been in places where, people would, have questions to ask, but they can't ask. And then when the meeting is done, they go ask the other guy who was bold enough to speak up. So how can people overcome shyness or this fear of speaking up?
Yeah, so I think shyness or fear of communication is something that really holds people back. In fact, I was hearing a story recently, and I wish I could quote the exact name of the person, but it was somebody who she had reached a high level in an organization and she'd been putting together this big project that was going to transform the company. At the last minute, she asked the intern to do the presentation of it and allowed them to take the credit for it, because she didn't want to actually step up and present it. And so at any point in your career, like early on or later, that fear can really wipe out your success. So I would say that if people are feeling shy or fearful in an area, again, to go back to what we talked about before, it's about building up slowly while going, just slightly expanding your risk. So, let's say, for example, when you first pass your driving test, you don't think, okay, I'm going to enter the Indy 500. Like, I'm going to go and drive a Formula One car, because you'd crash instantly. But instead, what you think is, okay, I'm going to see, now I've passed my driving test, I'm going to see if I can drive to the shops and back by myself. And then you think, okay, maybe I'll drive at night. Maybe I'll drive at nighttime when it's raining and see if I can do that. And then maybe I'll take a passenger in the car, and you gradually build this up to the point where you get to where you drive a car, you get to the destination and you cannot remember driving the car. Like, you don't remember pressing the indicator, you don't remember turning the windshield wipers on, you don't remember any of that, because it's so automatic now. Yeah. And so, I'd say the same thing for me, going from a position of being really shy and terrified of public speaking. It was always about like just stepping forwards, where I thought, when I was at school, they were doing school plays and musicals. And even though I was terrified, I did think, oh, I would like to do that show, but I'm scared to do it. And I thought, I'm just going to audition. Like, if I get the part and I don't want to do it, I can back out. Like, if they think that I'm no good, I can walk away. It's no problem. And so I'm so glad that I started doing that early on. And I'd say to anybody, like whether you're 5 or 85, it doesn't matter. If there's an opportunity to put yourself forward, go and do it, because even if it doesn't work out, you can think, okay, that was a learning experience. And now you're less fearful. You'll be less shy in the next situation. I've been coaching my kids on this, where they have to sort of do a speech to be voted class president or whatever it might be. I said to them, don't even think about trying to win this. Just think about this as an experience. I'm not bothered either way if you get it or not. I'm proud of you for doing it. And so, I encourage them to do it, even when they feel shy, even when they feel like, I don't want to go to school today because we have to do this thing. being able to go through those experiences builds up the strength, builds up the experience, where in future, when you get put into situations where you think, I have to do that thing I'm afraid of, I have to do that thing where I just don't want to be in the room, your mind will say to you, but you've done it 400 times. You have been through smaller versions of this and bigger versions of this over and over again. And so now you can. So again, it comes back to my principle of, whatever happens, don't pull away from it. Lean into the situation. And whenever you have that opportunity, step forwards. So it becomes like a mindset. And what you'll create is a neural pathway of saying yes. Like if there's an opportunity where people in the room say, hey, who wants to do the presentation to the client? Say yes. Say yes, and then get the support that you need. And also in many situations, get the training, the expert coaching that you need, so that actually you turn your courage into an experience that's as successful as it can be.
Awesome. So to before I wrap things up, talk about Body Talks. I mean, when I saw the name of the company, I was like, this speaks to more. This is about communication, Body Talks. So why Body Talks? Like, what is the idea behind coin? Because I'm a branding person. So what came about that name, that phrase, Body Talk, and what has been the journey like for Body Talks?
So I named the company Body Talk simply because I was fascinated with communication. That's where I started my journey with communication. And so I was reading books on body language when I was a teenager. And when I was studying as an actor, one of my teachers, a movement teacher, he said that I was a really good physical actor. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. He sort of explained that I was good at embodying different characters. So I'd be a great character actor to transform for different roles. And that was how I made my way with sort of creating a character. And so body language was my fascination, was sort of my specialist point 23 years ago. And so I needed a website. And I put in bodylanguage.com, somebody had taken it. Okay. I put in bodytalk.com, somebody had taken it. I put in ukbodytalk.com because I'm from the UK. And I wanted a .com, not a .co.uk. So I put in ukbodytalk.com and it was available. So I thought, that's it. That's the name of the company. And, since then, I mean, I delivered countless sessions that have nothing to do with body language these days because I'm teaching storytelling or mindset on those days or something. And people occasionally say, why is the company called Body Talk? But we've kept it because people, our clients who've known us for decades now love it. And they often talk about doing this. They'll say, when we're not in the building, they'll say, this presentation's not good enough. Let's body talk this presentation, by which they mean, right, let's make it into extraordinary communication. It's stuck with us ever since.
Great. I mean, I think for me, it speaks to me when I heard the name, it's communication, Body Talks is communication. Great. Before you go, we usually ask our guests final 3 questions, and you can answer the question in one word. You can choose to also expand on the word. And the first question is, what is the thing that you had to change 5 years ago, or go back 5 years ago, that has either transformed your business or transformed your life, that you wish you had done earlier on? I know that's a lot of, so 5 years ago, you had to make a change. You had to do something different, but now it has caused a transformation in your life or your business. What would you say that is?
Very simple, comes straight to mind there. 5 years ago, I had to essentially embrace leadership. And what I mean by that is that when I started my company, it was a hobby, and then I needed new people. So I hired new people, but I never actually wanted to be a leader. I'd never set out with the ambition of being a leader of any kind. And as the company grew, and occasionally people were sort of prompting me, like coaches I was working with were saying, you really need to read these books on leadership, step up and be a leader. And I'd say to them, no, I want to be a teacher. Like, I want to create content. I want to teach content. I'm not really interested in leading things. Maybe I'll hire someone to lead the company. But people wanted me to lead. And what I came to like 5 years ago was a position where we had a very difficult culture at the company. There was a culture of expectation, with many of the people who were working with me expecting me to do everything for them, almost like the tail was wagging the dog. I was in a position of sort of people pleasing, trying to do everything that I could for others, rather than in a leadership position where I could point the boat in the right direction and say, this is where we're going. Everybody needs to crew the ship, and let's head in this direction. And so I realized 5 years ago I had to get very serious about being a strong leader, understanding what strong leadership was all about, in order to turn the tide, sort of shift things in the right direction for my company. And as a result of that, we've entirely shifted the culture to the point where we have an extraordinary team. Like, it was a painful process to go through, but it was a process of growth for me, extraordinary, emotional, mental growth that I had to really work through to get to a point where we now have the best team that we've ever had, the most sort of talented, appreciative, respectful, professional, high delivering team that we've ever had, and truly a team as well. So I would say, if people are in a situation where they think, but this just isn't me, this thing that my life is asking me to do right now isn't what I've been doing in the past, you've got to step into it. Like, my phrase around this, which I hope you'll like, is grow or life will make you grow. Grow or life will make you grow. So you got two choices there, and I took the second one, and that was painful. I wish I'd taken the first one.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of the quote I recently heard from John C. Maxwell. He said, some people lead their life while some people accept life, right? So we have to be intentional, if you want to create change. And thanks for sharing that leadership. So second question, what is something that you okay, I think you've answered the question in this first question, so I'm going to skip that. So what would you say has been the greatest channel that has helped you to really grow your leadership, your communication skill? Now, when I mean channel, I mean, medium. Some people could have maybe say, oh, I had to, do more of live session on LinkedIn, or I had to attend event. What would you say was your channel that you had to lean into to be able to improve your communication skill?
Yeah, a great question. I think for me, there's two elements put together here, if I can explain it this way. So first of all, when I was no good at communication, or certainly struggling a lot, I read 200 books on communication. And that for me was a way of expanding my mind in a very safe space where, I can't fall down. When I'm reading a book, I was able to see what was needed from myself and sort of gather my knowledge there. But that's not enough. Like, gathering information in a book, it's a theory. It's not good enough in practical sense. So what I did was two things at once. So I was reading all those books, but the second thing I did very early in my career is that I did 1,000 presentations. And what I mean by that, I did 1,000 times the same presentation to 1,000 different audiences. So I was working with a client where they hired me to learn a presentation that had to be delivered in a very specific way. It was legally approved wording and so on. And so I had to learn it and then deliver it over and over. And I did it 200 times a year for 5 years. And it was essentially exactly the same information, just with a few statistics changed. And what that gave me was this extraordinary opportunity to take everything I'd learned in these 200 books and apply it each day. And so because I was delivering the same information to a similar group of people, different people every day, but a similar sort of profile of people, I could think, okay, today what I'm going to do, I'm just going to change one thing about how I gesture and see if that makes me feel better and see if it gets a better reaction from them. And if it did, great, I kept it. If it didn't, I thought, okay, forget that. That's just a theory in a book that doesn't work. Let me find another strategy. And then I'd apply something else and apply something else. And so that gave me the opportunity to build up a set of skills that by the end of those 5 years, I thought, I know what works for people in business internationally, because I've proven it for myself. I can now go and teach that to other people. And so I would say, coming back to what we talked about earlier, learning something and then having the experience of putting it into action is pivotal to put those two pieces together.
Okay, my mind is going to different questions, but I'm going to keep us, to the time we have now. The last question is, what would you say is your favorite book of all time that you can recommend to a Gen Z who is just picking up communication as one of their skill or their tool they're going to use to shape the world? What would you say is that book that changed your life that you're going to pass on to them?
Oh, such a hard question to answer. So let me answer it in a roundabout fashion, and people can choose what they want. If you'd stopped at saying what is your favorite book that you would recommend to people, then I would say for that the younger generation to pick up on would be Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, because like if you want a mindset where you are going to get through absolutely everything that comes your way, every challenge that you face, going for that book, as long as you don't mind too much swearing, then that's a phenomenal book. But in terms of communication, for people to pick up a book that works, the reason I wrote my book is because that book didn't exist, but I don't want to just recommend my book. So books on communication, I think the pivotal skill that people need in communication is storytelling, because storytelling is something that you can use whether you're sending an email, writing a document, you're speaking to one person or speaking to 1,000 people. If you're good at storytelling, it means that you can take complex ideas or anything you come up with and transform it into concise, clear, and compelling information that people want to listen to and want to act on. So I would say work on storytelling. For me, when I looked at storytelling, I studied it from a fiction standpoint first. And so I looked at Robert McKee. So that's McKee, Robert McKee. I've had the privilege of interviewing him previously as well. And his students have gone on to win 60 Oscars, I think it is, and over 200 Golden Globes. I believe I'm right in saying that. And so he really understands how storytelling actually works. And once you understand it from a fiction standpoint, then you can go on to put it into practice in day-to-day life. There are other books on storytelling, such as Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, but it's very difficult read. There's Christopher Vogler's version of that, which is called The Writer's Journey, which is more accessible, talks people through the hero's journey, and so on. But Robert McKee, I've been fascinated with. I think he's a great storyteller. I've seen him live and read his books, so that's probably the direction I would go in. Is storytelling.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. I see this conversation continue, and I'm grateful for this opportunity, but I hope that when next we invite you again, because I know there's a lot to still talk about. There's storytelling, there is content creation, there is executive presence. There's a lot that I know with the time we have, you can't share a lot. So I hope that when next I invite you, that you come on the show. But thank you so much for your time. If we were to find you, I'd like to also give this opportunity. What would be the best place to find you, to connect with you on social media?
So the best place to go is to liftyourimpact.com, which is the title of my new book. People can also go to ukbodytalk.com. If you want to find me on social media, the main place I'm on social is LinkedIn. So it's Richard Newman Body Talk, which is 2 words, body space talk, Richard Newman. Or you can find me on Instagram at Richard Newman Speaks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Great, thanks.